Okay, welcome everybody to today's panel on our multi-faith panel on resilience. We are so glad to have you with us today for such a timely conversation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're all coming to this moment from many different places and times, both time zones and mental times and emotional times. And I'd like us all to let go of wherever we just were and be here in this moment. So to honor our transition to this panel, I'd like to invite everyone who's comfortable to join me in closing your eyes for 30 seconds of silence. Thank you all. We can join back together now. So for those of you whom I have not gotten to meet yet, my name is Allyson Zacharoff. I am the organizer and moderator for today's panel. I'm Jewish and I am a student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my passion in life is bringing all of you together, people of different backgrounds and traditions and non-faith traditions and all different things, so that we can learn from each other and grow in understanding and respect. I've been blessed to do this work in a lot of different places around the world, and I'm so grateful for you all joining for our virtual panel today. This panel has been generously supported by the John Paul II Center Russell-Berry Fellowship Alumni Grant Program, as well as the Interfaith Youth Core Alumni Leadership Fund. During our meeting today, I'll be managing our technology. Our audience is going to remain on mute because otherwise I will get overwhelmed. But I warmly invite you throughout to private message me questions that you'll have for our panelists during our Q&A, and I will sort and combine those for the end. So message me all the time, I can manage it. So we come to our topic of discussion today, fostering resilience during this global pandemic. We have all seen a sweeping wave of illness and of despair around the world as people have been overcome since March of this year. Sitting here 9 months in, we've all, I'm sure, been through many phases throughout the pandemic at different moments for each of us. There may have been moments of solidarity and hope as we saw people applauding our healthcare workers, as people wear masks to protect loved ones. There have been moments of innovation as all of us, people of all ages, have had to quickly learn how to use technology pretty much overnight, as we move things even like religious services in school online. We've seen moments of joy as families have been able to reunite after long periods of quarantine. But then there have been the incredibly challenging and overwhelming parts of this pandemic. The moments of fear when we felt anxiety as we or our loved ones have felt sick and we worried if someone had caught it. The times of despair as feelings of loneliness and distance have settled in after months of not seeing loved ones, even moments of depression. And then the moments of deep grief as people we know have died, or when the entire situation is just too much to handle. There is no doubt that we are in a unique moment of history, all of us around the world, people of different faith and non-faith traditions. And so I'm so grateful today to hear a little bit more about what Judaism, Christianity, and Islam can teach us about resilience, about fostering that inner strength, even in moments of great loss and despair. I'm so very honored and grateful today to be sitting on this virtual stage with three incredibly strong and learned leaders from our different traditions. Our session today will involve presentations by each of our speakers, going through Reverend Thomas and then Rabbanit Fruchter and then Dr. Ibrahim, followed by our collective question and answer session at the end. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to send me private chats with questions that you have. You can tell me which speaker you want to ask or all of them, and I'll keep track of these for our session at the end. Great. So without further ado, it is my great honor to invite our first speaker, Reverend Mahogany S. Thomas, up to the virtual podium. Reverend Thomas is a native of Columbia, Missouri, and an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ. She serves as the executive minister of People's Congregational United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. Before People's Congregational UCC, Reverend Mahogany served as the Minister of Youth and Families at First Church UCC in Middletown, Connecticut. She's a graduate of Yale Divinity School, where she received her Master's of Divinity, and Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, where she received her Bachelor of Arts and graduated summa cum laude. In both her teaching and radical proclamation, Reverend Mahogany is passionate about serving God and God's church. She defines ministry as far beyond the pulpit and believes in radiating the love of Jesus through both her joy and witness. Reverend Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Allyson. It is good to be with all of you. I'm grateful to be here with friends, with colleagues, with each and every one of you. So my name is Mahogany, and like she said, I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. I like to tell folks who may not be familiar with the United Church of Christ that I am a progressive Christian. I am a liberal Christian. For me, God, politics, life, it all intersects. It's all connected together. For me, you cannot separate God and justice. You cannot separate God from each and every one of our lives. And so that's really important to my identity as a pastor. And if you are really close friends with me, or even just in a small conversation, you would know that I'm a lover of Jesus. I just tell folks that I just love Jesus. Jesus ain't got to be everybody's jam, and I'm more than fine with that. But Jesus is my jam. And so much of what I do stems from this love of Jesus. And I love Jesus because for me, it is the humanity of God that gives me something to connect to and share out even in this moment now. I also tell folks that I am a pastor. I'm not a politician. I'm not many other things, but I am very much a pastor. And so it's my love of Jesus that really exudes in all of my work, in my joy and my pastoral spirit. And so when you connect, right, this passion that I have for the humanity of God, a God that comes made flesh. And when you connect that to resilience, for me, hope, promise, justice, they're all so deeply intertwined because I understand a God who is tangible and a God who really knows what the human experience is like. And so for me, when I look at this pandemic overall, as a pastor, I've been really concerned about the trauma. I think about in the beginning, we started as very much doing almost crisis intervention. So as soon as the onset of it within the United States, pastors, people, healthcare workers, all of us, all across the world, we started this almost crisis intervention and crisis response. And as a result, something that was really kind of in my spirit was the trauma that we were living through, the trauma that's connected to our bodies, the trauma that we are holding and carrying, the trauma from grief, and not just grief as we lost physical people, but also the grief of losing our sense of normalcy as we knew it, celebrations, all of the things that we longed for, routine, all of that began to shift, and it shifted rapidly. And so as a result, there was so much trauma that started really living in our bodies. And if there's anything that we know about trauma, we share trauma. That trauma is both individual, but it's also collective. And so for me, and who I am as a pastor and as a teacher, I feel responsible to do something about the trauma. And so the God that I serve, the Jesus that I know to be true, really teaches me what it means to be a soul healer. And for me, resiliency is connected to how we heal one another, how we open up opportunities for healing, how we find ways to heal together individually and collectively, and to share that. So resiliency is deeply connected to our healing, and it's deeply connected with how we then share healing with one another. And for me, it is all stems from this God that I love, right? And because I have this connection with God, I then am constantly reminded of our belovedness. I then am constantly reminded that we all deserve to feel wholeness and the holy and the sacred. I'm reminded that all of our lives are holy and sacred and true and well. And so our access to healing is our right. And so resiliency really comes from taking this intentional time and space and to help us all begin to heal together individually and collectively from all walks of life in every avenue that we do. And I think that that's really important because if we want to talk about sustainability, right? Resiliency isn't just for a moment. We aren't just resilient so we make it to tomorrow. We're resilient so that those who come after us continue to see a story, right? They continue to hear a narrative. Those who come after us, right, have access to life and joy and hope and healing because we learned how to heal. And because we learned how to heal, we then were able to share, right, methods of healing that others can tap into. And so where this becomes personal for me, how I personally foster this on a practical level is that I intentionally find places to make joy. When you are dealing with times of catastrophic grief, as this pandemic has caused us, right? This pandemic, not just in the sense of coronavirus, right? But also this rapid awareness, right? Of racism that we really see. I live in Washington, D.C. So right now, all you hear about are the churches that were vandalized, right? And their Black Lives Matter flags were literally set on fire, all of which is trauma. And two, how do we heal? For me, resiliency also becomes in the practice of joy that we then choose to make for ourselves. So I have chosen to find small joy, sunshine, the snowfall, the little things, a cup of coffee that also give me hope for a moment that make my soul smile. Someone asked me the other day, they said, Mahogany, how do you define joy? And I said, for me right now, knowing that it can change in the moment because it's all contextual, but for me right now, joy is defined by making my soul smile. And I think that that's connected to my faith and my resiliency in this world and in this time. Also, I think that we have to have healthy practices of rest and self-care. I don't believe that resiliency means self-sacrifice or it means that you can't care for yourself. I actually think that because of how we connect to God and the divine, we have to be able to care for ourselves and nurture our souls in a way that truly orients us to heal so we can share that with others. And so I think that's really important, learning how to care for yourself in this moment, in this time of pandemic, and all the hurt and the pain, and also learning how to share that care. Those to me are all of the places where God and Christ really intersect with where I see resiliency now. So thank you for letting me share for a moment.
Amazing. Thank you, Reverend Thomas, for sharing your, as someone messaged me just now, infectious joy with us and guidance on resiliency. So thank you so much. I'm very happy now to introduce our next speaker, Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. I am going to spotlight her for everyone. Rabbanit Fruchter is the founder and spiritual leader of the South Philadelphia Shtiebel. She received smicha in 2016 and completed her MPA in Nonprofit Administration and MA in Jewish Studies from New York University's Wagner School of Public Service. Rabbanit Fruchter, a Wexner Graduate Fellow, is a passionate educator and community builder, and also serves on the clergy team at Beth Shalom Congregation and Talmud Torah in Potomac, Maryland, as halachic advisor for NIDA and women's health. She is driven by relationship-based community building, facilitating meaningful ritual, and harnessing the power of spiritual community to make the world a better place. And she is a superstar in our Jewish world. So please, Rabbanit Fruchter.
There we go. Hi. Wonderful to be with you. Thank you, Allyson. Thank you, Reverend Thomas. That was awesome. And Dr. Ibrahim, it's great to be with all four of us together. And I've been examining your Zoom backgrounds, and I'm just very, very excited to get to know you even better. This is so fabulous. I find these opportunities so nourishing personally. So thank you, Allyson, for bringing us together. It's very special, and really, really appreciate gathering with all of you here today to talk about this important topic. That's less a topic and more a muscle, I guess, resilience, right? And I'm here with all of you 9 months in somewhere to this pandemic. For me, it's 9 months after my own COVID diagnosis, and I'm still dealing with the effects of that for myself and my own body. So I'm kind of clocking it that way as well. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about what it means to be resilient through this with each of you. I want to share with you a little bit about what feminists used to tell me about getting ordained as a clergy member in the Orthodox community. And I promise it's relevant to our discussion. It's weird. It's not a thing that that's so old, right? To be able, for someone like me, grew up Orthodox, to be able to serve in this capacity. And sometimes what people would say to me when I was experiencing hardships or going through difficulties, or people would walk out of my sermons or frown at me, or I see someone's Zoom background is never read the comments, right? So yeah, I was reading the comments. Obviously, I was reading the comments. So someone came up to me and said, you know what, Dasi, you just got to have a thick skin. That's what you got to do. You got to have a thick skin. And it happened more than once that someone blessed me with a thick skin. And I was very disturbed by this, and I couldn't really explain why. And my gut was telling me that I didn't want one. I didn't want a thick skin. I wanted a thin skin. I wanted to be able to feel everything that people were telling me and all of the things that were coming at me. I didn't want to push them away. I didn't want to have armor. And that became a meditation for me on resilience, the whole idea of thick skin. Because I think what ends up happening around crisis and tragedy sometimes, we tell each other, don't worry, you're gonna get through this. You know this idea, you're gonna get through this. And it becomes more of the experiences, let this tragedy or this grief bounce off of your skin as opposed to letting it sink in. Imagine that you're covered with armor and you'll fight through this disease, right? And I just didn't experience that as an authentic way to be resilient. To me, it felt like I was keeping things out and I wasn't letting the fissures or the cracks or the brokenness show. And therefore it was building up and becoming untenable, something I couldn't really hold. So what I want to bring to you today as perhaps a tool from the Jewish tradition around resilience is the idea that inviting in complexity, inviting in pain is actually a perfect way through. And one of the best ways to even imagine this is like, we have this idea that every year during Passover, we're supposed to imagine ourselves at our Seder tables as if we ourselves were leaving Egypt during the enslavement of Egypt, that we ourselves are on our way out. And when Moses, the great prophet, met God for the first time, where was God, right? I always think about this. It's like when God introduces God's self to Moses, God's like in a burning bush. Do you think about this? Like a shrub, a burning shrub. Weird. And it says that the shrub is not consumed, but it's burning, right? So I'm always thinking about this shrub. What's the deal with it? And the commentaries talk about one really interesting thing about this shrub. It's not an evergreen. That's not what we're talking about. It's not some beautiful tree that God's in. It's a weird, gnarly, spiky location that's on fire, right? It's amazing. Like, think about that. That's where we find God. God is in this place talking to us from this place of intense pain. And the shrub actually shows up again in the incident of Abraham going to sacrifice his son Isaac. And Isaac, at the last moment, there's this shift and a ram shows up, right? And that ram is caught in a shrub. Right? And it's from that shrub, actually, that the shofar, the great symbol of redemption for the Jews, comes. So I just want to turn to this image as perhaps an image that might be helpful for resilience at this moment. What might it look like? And the rabbis talk about this explicitly in early sources and ancient sources, that the shrub is where we are. We are entangled in complexity and complication. The Hebrew word for shrub is actually related to the modern Hebrew word for complication. Savach is related to the word misubach, bush or shrub, and complication, right? That's what we're in right now. We don't shy away from it, we're in it. And it's from that place that redemption can come. And I keep thinking about this in general in other Jewish ideas about complexity and how those moments of complexity and pain really help the most beautiful things emerge. Now, it's not easy to tell someone, right? Just love the shrub, right? Love being in the pain. You should appreciate this because something wonderful will occur and emerge from this. No, actually you say this shrub is burning, period, right? That's it. The shrub is burning. And what we know is that there's a pattern, right? That after that, there's a redemption. But right now, that's what we see and that's what we're in. So I'm going to take that for my own community. And what does it mean, by the way, to like shepherd a community through this is another question, right? Especially when we deal with our own things and we have our own pain. And, you know, Reverend Thomas and Dr. Ibrahim, I would love to talk to you about that question, right? Like how it is that we care for ourselves while helping others be resilient. My MO has been, let's sit in the pain. You do not have to say when the vaccine comes. I don't need to hear that from you if you don't want to say it. You don't have to, right? Like, because right now, today is today, and we will adapt to today. And you can be sad or you can be happy or whatever it is, they're all okay. And there's this resilience that can emerge. Finally, I want to offer one more verse that's really striking and goes back to my original comment about thin skin. It's a verse in Ezekiel or Yechezkel, where God basically lets us know that God will take away our stone hearts and put within us a heart of flesh. And I love that idea. And sometimes when I'm thinking about what I need to get through this moment, it's the ability to deeply feel the prickliness of the shrub. Because I know that letting the fissures and the brokenness show will let that light in to eventually help me see where the redemption is in this moment. So that's my hope for myself and for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter, both for your wisdom and for offering me some more Jewish insight into this topic. I really appreciate it. Just as a reminder to any folks who came in a little bit later, please feel free as we go through our wonderful panelists to message me any questions you have for our question and answer session at the end. I'm very happy now to introduce our final presenter for this morning or afternoon or evening, depending where you are, Dr. Celene Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim is the author of Women and Gender in the Quran by Oxford University Press and the editor of the anthology One Nation Indivisible, Seeking Liberty and Justice from the Pulpit to the Streets. Her current book project, forthcoming from Cambridge University Press, details how the concept of monotheism informs Muslim thought and practice. Dr. Ibrahim received a doctorate from Brandeis University, a Master's of Divinity from Harvard University, and a Bachelor of Arts from Princeton University. She is a chaplain, scholar, and educator, and has lectured at hundreds of civic and cultural institutions across the United States and internationally. And I'm grateful to say she was also my teacher a few years ago. I'm honored to turn the floor over to Dr. Ibrahim.
Greetings and peace. It's such a joy to be with you all here today. Thank you, Reverend Thomas. Thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter. It's just really, I'm blown over by the wisdom that you've both shared and resonate deeply with that idea of healing and self-care and recognizing justice and the pursuit of justice as a spiritual struggle, a spiritual obligation, a duty, and Rabbanit Fruchter, to stay in those moments of struggle, that resonates so deeply, and that beauty emerges from the pain. I'm reminded of the metaphor of the birthing process as that point at which the struggle, that something so miraculous emerges from a point of great agony. There's also the metaphor in the Quran of the hearts of stone, that some hearts are like stone and they don't crack, and some hearts are like stone but they crack, and inside them is water, and some hearts are soft. So we also have that very similar metaphor from the Quran. So I wanted to bring a few really core Islamic ideas to folks today. And one of those core ideas is the word sabr, which is a word that means patient perseverance. And it doesn't just mean patience, and it doesn't just mean perseverance. It really is that combination of, being in that moment, being in that metaphorical burning bush moment, and finding in that moment, finding that sense of wholeness and sense of ability to thrive even in difficult times. And so the idea of sabr is throughout the Quran, and the expectation for Muslims is that life is a test. And that's in fact the purpose of life from a Quranic perspective. And so one way to think about being in a moment that requires resilience, like the one we're in now, or like so many moments we find ourselves in life, is to ask the question, what am I personally learning from this? What is my growing edge in this moment? How, what lesson am I taking out of this moment that I am going to carry through, hopefully when this moment is over? And so I invite everyone to think about, over the past months of this pandemic particularly, or any other struggles that are in your life now, and to go deep inside and ask, what is the character trait that I'm being called upon to increase in this moment? What is the disposition that, if I were to cultivate it now in this moment and keep it with me for the future, that I would be on so much better footing to face whatever the next crisis or trial is in life. So that idea of patient perseverance is that even in the worst of circumstances, that there's an ability for the human spirit to grow. And this is the idea of a jihad, or a spiritual struggle. So what is that growing edge for me in this particular moment, is something I ask myself regularly in the midst of a struggle. In the midst of a struggle, there's a tension between wanting to hold out some type of hope, and also at the same time, as the Rabbanit described so beautifully, acknowledging that moment of hurt or pain, or anger or frustration, or whatever the feelings are. If we acknowledge the feelings, and then we also try to find the hope, and partly for me, finding that hope or that joy, Reverend Thomas, as you mentioned, is in that spirit of gratitude. Because as much as there's maybe frustration or anger or just despair, there's always things to find a sense of gratitude. And gratitude is one of those emotions that makes the heart, the chest, makes the soul force of the human being feel a sense of expansion. And so, as we learn from many spiritual traditions, whether that's just sitting in a space of gratitude, the feeling of gratitude, or cultivating that feeling by starting to list off all of those things to be grateful for. there's a line from a popular song that's coming into my mind. You don't know what you got till it's gone. And it's easy to focus on the things that are gone. But I think as a practice for cultivating resilience, if we're focusing on the things that we do have, even when other things are gone, that can help bring us into not just a feeling, but a disposition of gratitude that hopefully carries us through. Like if resilience was a muscle, gratitude is also that other side of resilience. In the Quran, we often hear the word sabr in combination with a direction to enjoin one another to patient perseverance, and enjoin one another to compassion. And also you find the recommendation, have patience and do good deeds. And so these two ideas, on the first hand, how do you cultivate resilience? Well, sometimes we just have to stop focusing on our own situation and turn our energies outwards and say, what can I do for other people in this moment as well? And so sometimes turning away from the self and turning out and saying, how can I be of use to other people is a great way to cultivate resilience. And then to urge other people to compassion. We all need compassion. Compassion in Arabic is the word that rahma, which comes from the root rahm, to kind of draw us back to that beginning of the womb being a tremendous place of struggle, but also of the miraculous life-giving force. And so compassion is that same thing, whether it's self-compassion or compassion to others, that being in that space as a disposition helps us build resilience as a practice. So thank you so much for sharing, for allowing me to share some thoughts. And I'm just honored to be with you today and to hear what things are resonating with all of those in attendance. Thank you again, soon to be Rabbi Zacharoff, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. What wonderful wisdom we can learn from you and from your tradition. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm so excited that we're moving into our question and answer portion of our discussion today. I've already gotten some great questions, but please feel free to message me throughout so that I can share them with our speakers. So the first question I'd like to ask for any or all of our speakers is, if you've shared such great things about being in the moment, being in the hurt and the trauma and the despair and accepting it. We've heard about searching for the joy. We've heard about turning outward to make sure that we think of others as a source of resilience for ourselves. And so I'm wondering if you could offer to those in attendance something that they should do today, something concrete that they can do when they log off this call. I'm wondering what it would be. It could be something that you personally choose to do in your daily life or something else inspiring. Oh, I have to ask you to unmute, right? Sorry. I don't know. I'm going to unmute all of you and assume that anyone who wants to jump in will jump in.
That's great. I can jump in. So I think from each of us, we have all listed beautiful invitations, invitations to work our muscles, muscles of patient perseverance, muscles of compassion, muscles of living in it, right? Embodying the struggle, muscles of gentleness, muscles of joy. The list goes on and on. And so the one tangible ask that I would offer is I invite you to choose one of those muscles and sit in it. Even if it's just 5 minutes, sit in the muscle of joy, or sit in the muscle of patient perseverance, or sit in the muscle of embodying even the brokenness. For just 5 minutes, do it intentionally. And then see what it opens up for you. And the beauty of these invitations are none of them just stop at us, but they're invitations that we then get to share with others. And so part one of it is, I would say, you choose a muscle, sit in it for about 5 minutes intentionally, and see what it opens up within yourself. But part B of that, part two, is then share that invitation with someone else and invite them to sit in the muscle and see how it all radiates and how it all intertwines. That would be my tangible ask.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists have a concrete suggestion for folks? I see half a nod. Is that a yes or a?
So I was also going to, Allyson, when you encouraged us all in that 30 seconds before we stepped on, I just realized in that moment how, coming off a busy teaching schedule today, I hadn't even given myself 30 seconds to just be present in that intentional way. So Reverend Thomas, I completely underscore everything you said about sitting there. And for me as well, I'm always balancing kind of reflection and reflective practice with action. And so I love as well how you had this call to share out. And I guess in the spirit of my remarks, I would encourage people to just do a brief gratitude practice where you can start with, I'm grateful for my breath, or my lunch, or whatever this is, and go out and try to cultivate that radiating feeling of gratitude as well. And a lot of times, if I find myself in that kind of radiating spirit of gratitude, it makes it a lot easier to extend compassion or extend some type of mercy to others, because we're not living from a place of fear or shortcoming or loss or anxiety. When we're in a spirit of gratitude, we're living from a place of overflowingness and peacefulness of spirit.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I guess just one thing I would add is, if someone calls you today, or if you get a call and they ask, how are you? My invitation would be for you to say, I'm pretty bad, or like whatever it is that the answer is, but just try to really answer, not with hanging in there or I'm okay. See what happens.
Amazing. Thank you, all three of you. I look forward to doing those in about 19 minutes. Wonderful. So the next question that I'd like to pose also to all speakers: how do you navigate the different perspectives on resilience among different age demographics in your communities? How do we facilitate intergenerational conversations about this idea? I love this question because I think about the different folks in my own life who've asked questions and posed the difficulties they're facing.
I think people oftentimes appreciate being deeply heard, and there's sometimes not a lot of opportunities to be deeply heard in life. And so even if it's people you're living with and you've been in close proximity to them, sometimes even then we're not really like listening or really kind of asking. To go off Rabbinit Fruchter, what you encouraged us to do as a practice, it led me to think that if we ask that question about how are you, no matter what age we are, if we can cultivate that sense of deep listening, really how is somebody, and taking the time. I think even as our schedules have been affected by pandemic things, we're maybe getting into our new pandemic normal, and maybe just taking some extra time to do something that is out of the already unusual pandemic routine, but just to spend that time with people. I think it's so important, and I'm reminding myself to do that as well.
I love that. That is so beautiful. I was also thinking about authenticity and how we share it with one another intergenerationally. So my last pastorate was primarily towards youth and families. My current pastoral work has a older demographic age range. And what I'm finding is that in the same way that resiliency is contextual, so we all have different methods of being resilient depending on how we're feeling in the moment, right? So if I'm having a bad day, my resiliency might not be joy if I can't feel it. It might just be sitting in the brokenness and saying that this sucks. But I think that the piece of this that really helps us intergenerationally is listening to the narratives of others and empowering their authenticity. Folks are more authentic when they see that I'm my authentic self. And I think that that's true for kids. I think that that's true for grandparents. I think that that's true for all aspects of life. And so I'm so grateful with what you just shared, because I think that's absolutely right. There is power in truth-telling narratives. And if we want to talk about healing across the margins, right, and across a wide range, it begins in truth telling and how we're listening and receiving those truths and holding those truths. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I actually had something come up a few days ago where I learned, or I remembered, that different generations have different reactions to the question of like expressing feelings or resilience or anything, right? So you can actually strike a wrong chord depending on the person you're talking to around expressing feelings. And so I guess something that the question made me think of is just that generationally, the way that folks sit with their feelings, it changes. So I know that personally for me, as someone that likes and makes her life spiritual caregiving, right? That's really important, but it's also important for each of us, right? That not everybody wants to share deepest of feelings, but they have their own way of telling you how it is that they're doing. And you have to sometimes read between the lines.
I'd like to ask you a question to follow up on that, Rabbanit. We had a question about what relationship, if any, do you see between spiritual health and mental health? And what role, if any, should religious leaders play in that mental health care?
Oh man, I kind of want to hear what my colleagues have to say about this.
You can answer for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're complementary. They exist. We're all part of a care team, right? Of someone who's going through something. But I know and think it's very important to include and privilege discussions of mental health. That I can't be an interventionist in that way. But again, I feel that my job is the muscles. Like, I love that frame that we're talking about today. It's like the spiritual muscles. That's my job. And that doesn't mean that someone isn't dealing with depression or bipolar disorder, right? Like, there's so many different things that go on, but it's a different role, I think. I'm curious what you have to say about that, my friends.
I think it's great that our culture has started this language around mental health, but mental health is a lot of things, and now we've labeled something in order to be able to talk about it, but there's so many compartments to that, and so I think there definitely there's clear links between like spiritual life and the life of the mind, or the biochemical balance of the brain, or whatever this is. And so I think now that we've opened this domain up to being able to talk about it, I think it behooves us to now like talk with more specificity around what area of mental health. Like, I work with students, and oftentimes their issue is they haven't slept because they've been up writing a paper all day. Okay, so that's one type of mental health. But then, sometimes, underneath that is anxiety that's not everyday anxiety, that some type of anxiety that needs to be treated by a psychiatrist. And so I think the more, just like we're kind of spiritual care professionals. I think the more spiritual care professionals can be in dialogue with kind of like psychiatrists and psychologists, which we aren't, I think the more we can get those kind of conversations going, I think that would be a great funding project for anyone who has any funders on the call. But yeah, it's so complicated, and we have to be sophisticated about how we're going. And on the other side too, psychiatrists and psychologists, the more that they can understand the work that spiritual caregivers do, I think the better we can put people in a place to be receiving care from multiple different kind of professional accesses.
Absolutely. I echo both of those sentiments. I think that spiritual care, spiritual practice, like it's not just one lane. So a lot of my responsibility as one's pastor, as I shepherd folks, is to invite them into multiple forms of spiritual practice. So yes, you can have pastoral care with me. We can pray together. We can talk, but you also can have a spiritual practice of seeing a therapist. And you also can have a spiritual practice of yoga. And you also can have a spiritual practice of pleasure. And you also can have a spiritual practice of silence. And I think that the more work that we do around opening and engaging, the way that multiple methods of spiritual practice are not mutually exclusive, but actually we can all like do these things to take care of our bodies, because we want our bodies to be well. We want our souls to be well. We want our minds to be well. And I think that because we're embracing the complexity, that we then get to see that there are multiple truths. And my job is to help you see that there are multiple truths that you can embrace and feel.
Amazing. Thank you, all three of you, for that answer. So I have a question for Dr. Ibrahim that came in. Someone on the call is wondering if you could expand a little more on what you meant when you mentioned jihad. The questioner was saying that she's heard it a lot in the media and wondering if you could explain it in this context for us.
Yeah, I paused and decided whether or not I was going to drop the J word. So there's this idea that because life is a test, life is also struggle. Like the principle of a test is that it's not necessarily always easy. And depending on who we are, maybe certain aspects are easy and other aspects are really hard. And so from the point of view of kind of from a Muslim worldview, if you're in life, you're going to have moments that are testing, like to you particular. And, what are they testing you in? They're testing you in character, because that's, we have a saying that says God doesn't look at external forms. God looks at like the spiritual form of the person. And this is khalq in Arabic is like the outer form, and khaluq is the word for character. And so there's a relationship, and what we're supposed to be cultivating from a Muslim perspective is this internal state. And so oftentimes our world causes us to place a lot of emphasis on the external. And so Islam in its core is this call to be in this space of character development. And so that space of character development, that's the jahada in Arabic means to exert oneself. And so even when life is great, say I have no pandemic, say whatever it is, okay, well, you can still exert yourself. Okay, your situation is great. Well, what about the person down the road? What about the person across the ocean? So even if our personal circumstances are great, we can always be exerting ourselves, or, out externally, like helping other people, or internally kind of cultivating those different virtues inside ourselves. That's the short answer.
Amazing. I'm sure not a question you've ever received before. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I love the internal focus on that too. In a lot of ways, I think that's often missed in media when they bring it up. So thank you. So we're getting close to our end, but I'd like to ask another question, which is for everybody again. And the question is, what does your faith tradition teach about the differences and roles of self-care versus care from the community? I think that's, and I'll add to that question, especially during the pandemic, right? I think a lot of times our communities can offer support in person, and what does that look like now when we might not be in person? That was the other half.
I think we're all waiting for each other to jump in.
We are.
It was like, were we born from the same embryo, all three of us?
We're waiting. We're siblings now forever.
Rabbanit, perhaps you could go first.
Sure. So I'm not sure like who the question is. The question like spiritual caregiver aimed at that or at a person in the community. I think it really depends. But I guess just I'll share that there are so many ways to care for someone else. And I was really inspired, Dr. Ibrahim, by that idea of forever reaching or grasping. And for me, I think we have a religious or spiritual obligation to keep reaching and grasping at how we're going to support each other and ourselves, right? Both of those things. So I think the concrete way that plays out in a time like this is saying, okay, just because I can't do that thing, like gather in that place or be with that person in that way, how am I going to be more creative than I've ever been in my life to reach that person? And if you don't have that in you, right, at the time, that's okay too. That someone should do that for you, right? I've been thinking a lot about Isaac's wells and redigging the wells of his father in the Torah, and just that idea that like, well, that's annoying that he had to redig the very same wells that his father dug, right, in Genesis. But actually, that's the work of the world, is we're always digging wells to find the water. So I guess one thing I would say is we dig for ourselves when we can. If we can't, we invite that from someone else in our communities. We deliver care packages. We make phone calls. We go on walks. We send letters. There are just like endless ways to dig those wells of water. And I think as a spiritual person, I don't ever want to give up on the goal of trying to do that and find that water.
That's beautiful.
That answer was just so beautiful and so complete. And, just to underscore something that I was thinking and dovetailed nicely with your remarks is that our need to ask for help when we have an issue, sometimes that's very difficult for people because they're used to being in the role of provider, or they're used to being they're used to being able to be in an able body and now have some type of need, like a physical need. And so that can be very difficult when people are shifting between being those roles of needing help or providing help and needing help too. And so sometimes people, especially like in these times where maybe somebody who provided doesn't have the same kind of source of income, or maybe somebody who was well is now sick. So just kind of the spirit of humility as well. Like we'll probably all be sick at some point in our lives. We'll probably all who knows, we might all need financial help at some point in our life, so that sense of, okay, and it ties back to that idea of compassion, but also that idea of, if you have a need, and maybe pride sometimes gets in the way of just being able to say, like, look, I have this need, or I'm in this trouble and I need help. So just that ability to asking for help doesn't diminish like our dignity. Yeah.
That's all. I agree with all of it. It is all beautiful. And to wrap it up, I'm going to go back to the spiritual framework that Rabbinic Fruchter so beautifully put out there for us about these spiritual muscles, y'all. Taking care of ourselves and one another requires you to care for your bodies. And just as Dr. Ibrahim has lifted, right, like how we are intentional to our bodies through compassion gratitude, patient perseverance, how those then extend out to one another, are all methods of both self-care and communal care. And for me, I can't care for the community if my body is not well. And so the pandemic has really charged me as a Black body, as a Black woman, to truly quiet my spirit and to hear the muscles within me that need to be strengthened and also that need to rest. I'm a runner, and you cannot overwork your legs every day. I can't run the same mileage 7 days a week. I have to have some rest days because my muscles need to rest. And the exact same thing is true for how we sit and embody in our brokenness and how we sit and care for our spirits. We have got to be in tune with ourselves to both exercise our muscles and rest our muscles so that we then can still ourselves long enough to hear how we can be communal care to one another. The beauty of this pandemic is that there's so much need and that there's so much that we can all do together compassionately and joyously in the healing work and resilient work. But you have got to listen to the needs of your body. And you have to make sure that you are okay, that you're well. That is so important if you want to care and extend care to others.
Thank you so much, all three of you. So we're now coming to our close. I'd like to invite everyone to please join me in thanking our speakers. You can like wave at the twinkle at the screen. Thank you, all three of you, so much. Thank you to our two groups who supported today's panel. And thank you to all of you for joining us today and offering such thoughtful questions. We'll hope to make this recording available online in the next few days. I'd like to offer a very brief closing prayer. If you're comfortable joining me for this, I invite you to adopt a comfortable position, however your body needs to be, perhaps with your eyes closed. Dear God, divine source, universe around us, thank you for bringing us together today in this virtual space for this time of building bridges and building resilience. Thank you for bringing these strong leaders together to share their perspectives. And please help us all find the inner strength as we face this continuing challenge. We think now of all those who have lost their lives to this illness and all the ones who work every day to care for them. And as we look forward, may we find hope in what can come ahead and finding light in the darkness. Amen. Thank you all again. Hag Sameach, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everybody. Thank you all so much.